Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm John Geib. I'm a master gardener. I've got extended training in both vegetables and in compost. I've been a master gardener for coming up on 11 years now. And I did my initial training over in Midland, and Midland makes this place look like a jungle. So I got really familiar with irrigation. So that's one of the reasons why I get tasked for doing the irrigation stuff. So this is kind of one of my normal irrigation talks. Highly compressed on the front end, and then we'll talk a lot more about specifics on the drip irrigation stuff. So we'll try and get a little bit more of the hands-on stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about, the why we need to water, where we're going to be watering, what we're going to be watering. The where is where we're getting our water from. How to water, which kind of is actually one of the big things. And then we'll start talking about the drip stuff. So technically we're not in a desert, but we're close enough that it qualifies some years, especially if you think back to 2011. We only had, I think it was 12 or 13 inches of rainfall, which is what Midland normally gets on a good year. So, it can be very bad on the drought years. In years like this, don't care. I've had 9 inches of rain so far in the last month, so I'm loving it right now. Now, depending on where you're at, you're going to be getting your water mainly from the city. If you're, City of Abilene, that's if you're connected to either the City of Abilene water supply, or if you're out of any of the outlying districts, any of the water districts. Most of them actually buy their water from City of Abilene and transfer it in, and then sell it off to you. So you get local service with, big city prices. If you are further out, you might be able to get a well. From what I understand, there are a few spots in Taylor County you can actually get a well to actually function, but most of the county is actually fairly dry when it comes to wells. So that can be an issue. A very good option to do it is rainwater capture, especially if you've got an area where you can do a lot of good catchment with gutters off of your roof system. That works really well for catching a lot of rain. The 2 inches of rainfall last night coming off of my barn probably gave me close to 4,000 gallons of water just from those 2 inches. So you can catch a lot of water with just a little bit of rain. Other thing, you just let Mother Nature take care of it. But like I said, be understanding that some years you're going to have issues. So you just have to work on it that way. Now, what are we watering? Well, if you're like the guy that lives down the street from me who's an avid golfer, that's what his front yard looks like year-round. He keeps it fairway, cut for a fairway, and it is bright green all year long. In fact, I walked by there a couple days ago, and it was the worst I'd ever seen it. It was all of about 3.5 inches tall. But, he hadn't mowed it that week, literally. That's how bad it was, the rain had done for it. But that takes a lot of water to do that. So we want to think about whether or not we want to actually do have a lawn in our yard. Now, a lot of people have kids or grandkids. They're going to need to go ahead and make sure that they have some lawn space for the kids to play on. That's understandable. But any lawn that we can pull out. We can do a whole lot better. If we do things like flower beds, we can usually cut our water needs from anywhere from 50 to 75%. So we can really cut back on the water, especially if we use the right plants, which we recommend around here. So we can really do a lot of good stuff, get a lot of pretty flowers. A lot of people talk about xeriscape. In Midland, it worked because we didn't get enough water. We get enough water here that if you put in a xeriscape like this, the winds will blow in the spring, they blow all the weed seeds in, and then the wonderful rain that we've gotten in the last month and a half turns this into a small jungle that is a nightmare to weed, and it will stay that way forever. So I do not recommend xeriscape around here. Or you could do a little bit more like me, just kind of let Mother Nature take care of most of the property. I live on a little bit of acreage out in the country, so I get a little bit of a chance to go, I'm not even going to mow over there. I'm just not going to worry about it. But I do have a lot of good, pretty flower beds and vegetable gardens and everything else right around the yard, and that's the only thing I irrigate. So it's kind of one of those fun things to work with. Or you could do what I also do, is I went out last year or the year before and I threw out about 4 pounds of wildflower seeds. It was an area that I hated mowing because it was like, it never looked good even when I did mow it, and it's just like, no, let me sprayed it down with Roundup, wiped everything out, came back, put all the wildflower seeds in, and this is what it looks like. Right now, the pink flowers, which is showy primrose, if you drive down any of the roads, especially out of town, you see the bardage is just completely covered in pink. That's showy primrose. Wonderful plant, needs absolutely zero water to be absolutely gorgeous for a couple of months during the summer. So, but then we got a whole lot of other larger wildflowers up in the back to make it up. So, unfortunately, I was also having a lot of issues with sunflowers last year when I took this picture. So, I don't have nearly the sunflowers this year, which is good.
I have them this year.
Oh, good. You can have them. So, now, when we're looking at what we're watering, we're looking usually most people live in subdivision or what was a subdivision that now just looks like city. And so we're looking at, a simple lot like this. It's very cheap and easy for the landscapers when they come in, when the guys are building your house to go, yep, sod's cheap and easy. And they throw in, a whole bunch of sod to cover all the dirt, and that's your landscaping. They'll give you usually 1 5-gallon tree, and if you're lucky, 10 or 12 1-gallon pots of various shrubs, usually not selected for this area, and so they die off in the first 2 years. So, yeah, you end up with a lot of grass and a tree that if you aren't careful with, you're going to have die on you too. So, if you're down towards the south or the north, in the newer areas, you're going to look more like the picture in the upper left, where there's nothing there. It doesn't look like there's anything there. If you're down more in town, you'll see a lot of the trees have grown up over the years, and so you might get a little bit of shade, so you get at least some interesting things around the house. But it's still pretty much grass and maybe a tree. So when we're watering each of the things, we're going to have to look at them to see what we need to do to water each particular area properly, okay? And it kind of breaks down into the lawn, the trees, the flower beds, any water features that you may have, and then vegetables kind of fall in their own category because you're running those a lot different than anything else because you're trying to get food out of them usually. So when we're talking about lawns, you got to realize that lawn is probably the most irrigated monocrop that we have in the country. The last stat I heard was something like 300 billion acres of grass is grown every year. I mean, it's some insane number like that. So, but it takes a lot of water to grow it. Depending on the variety, we usually recommend either a hybrid Bermuda or regular Bermuda. Those are probably the most adapted to our area to be able to handle our weather, both our heat in the summer and the droughts that we get a lot of times. And so we end up with those particular grasses. St. Augustine will work if you get some shade. My key word there is some shade. Okay, a fully shaded yard will not grow grass. Period. It just won't. If you've got the money, I was talking with a landscaper. He was saying, yeah, there's a guy that he actually has that they run about every 3 years. He'll come in and resod his entire yard because his St. Augustine that he plants in the shade, fully shaded yard, grows okay the first year, starts dying off the second year. By the third year, it's looking pretty bad, and so they come in and resod it. He's got the money. That's his choice. But I'm like, that's not me. I'm too lazy and too cheap.
What about RTF?
RTF. What is RTF?
Rhizomitis tall fescue.
I don't know anything about it.
You're filling it with approved.
Okay.
It's in my front yard.
Okay.
It's in one patch.
Okay. My guess, fescues usually are a cool season crop. So they're going to be at least green, at least somewhat through the winter, and probably in the late fall, early spring at least. So it's an option to keep your yard looking a little green because Bermuda does die off to that wonderful yellow every year. So at first freeze. So, but fescues usually do take a lot more water. So, yeah, that's the one problem with fescues. But if we're looking at, Bermuda or even St. Augustine, we're looking at least 1 inch of rainfall a week minimum to keep it at best looking okay. We're talking St. Augustine, we're probably looking almost closer to 1.5 to 2 inches just to keep it really nice and pretty and green. So it's just a lot of water. How much water? Well, those standard lot sizes that you see, it's about 0.2 acres, a little over 8,000 square feet. Take out the house, the driveway, the garage, all that, and you're looking at about 5,000 square foot of sod, because that's what most of our property is sod. And it's about 12,000 gallons of water per month that the grass needs to grow, with figuring that 1 inch of rainfall a week. Okay, now that's the actual water that the plant needs. That's not what we're actually trying to put onto it, which comes into the fun part. How we get to irrigate. If you're using any of like the fan sprayers, the rotary sprayers, anything like that, those have a moderate efficiency. They're looking probably between 70 and 75% efficient on the water use. So it means for every gallon that you put out, the grass actually sees 3/4 of a gallon, because that other 1/4 of a gallon gets lost through evaporation, either as it's going up and dropping down, or just sitting there on the ground and being able to be evaporated before it goes away and gets absorbed into the yard. So those have a fairly high efficiency. Now, if you use things like if you're doing an actual in-ground sprinkler system, with the little pop-up sprinklers like this. Okay, let me do this one first. The little lawn tractors like this, these are kind of cute. They're designed to actually follow the hose around, so you can kind of control where they're going a little bit better. One of the problems with these types, yards are square. The one on the right gets a nice circle, so you either get corners that don't get watered, or if you move it far enough over to hit the corner, you're now watering the concrete for the driveway and the sidewalk. And no matter how much you try, concrete's not going to grow. So, you're wasting water there. These are nicer because, if you turn them down, the little wands on them right here, you can actually control how high and how low those go to help control how wide of a pattern. So if you can narrow those down a lot and then run the hose a couple more times, you get a much smaller patch so that the corners can actually get hit fairly well. It's a much smaller area that doesn't get watered well. So these aren't too bad. These wonderful green disc types kind of avoid the issue of spraying where there isn't grass, because they're designed to spray out in a pattern. The problem is they're basically a shaped hole, and so when it comes out, a lot of that water pattern looks like what you'll see in the lower right, which is a standard pop-up sprinkler head. It's just blast out, and depending on the pressure, you can get a lot of the water turning into a very fine mist, which will blow away or evaporate. Those types of sprinklers can be down in the 50% efficiency rate, so you lose a lot of water there. The pop-up sprinklers, same thing, be similar to this. They will run usually about 50% efficiency on them, depending on how high the pressure is on them. When you see it like this, where it's a very fine mist, that's when we're really having problems. But the problem is, to get that spring to push up and pop that up, and to get a decent throw on it, you got to have the pressure high, which means you're misting that a lot more than you need to. The newer styles, you can actually go out and get replacement heads for these. These pop up fairly easily. And you can actually unscrew the top on them like that. And you can go ahead and then swap them out with these little rotor heads you'll see on the left. And it's basically a little mini pivot system for your pop-up sprinklers. Because they are a jet of water, the droplets are much fatter, have much less loss due to evaporation, and these things will run probably in the 75 to 80% efficient range. So it's a lot of water savings if you can just swap out the heads on those. Now, the neat thing is, how much water are you actually putting out on your yard? Well, you can go around each of these emitters like this. They'll have some information on the side. Tells you, this one's a quarter circle, and it tells you, let's see, where is this? 10-foot diameter circle, and it does 1 gallon per minute at 25 psi. Okay, well, that's 1 gallon of water. It says it puts out. Well, how much is that it's actually getting to your yard? So what we need to do is go through and determine how much is actually going into the yard. So one of the easiest ways to do that is use tuna fish cans or cat food cans. Clean them out a little bit and just go set a bunch of them around your yard in each of the zones that you want to test. Run the sprinkler for 10 or 15 minutes and see how much water is in those catfish in the cans, and that'll tell you just how much water was actually put onto the yard in that time frame. One of the things with these pop-up sprinklers, they do put a lot of water out. Like I said, 5 gallon, a gallon a minute, something along those lines. If you put on too much water, especially with our heavy clay soil, a lot of times you're going to get runoff, so it's not going to be able to soak into the soil. And so we may have to actually break up our waterings into a couple of different cycles, either on the same day or consecutive days, to get that good deep watering that we want to do. So we want to do good deep watering. Critical reason for that is we want to try and get the roots of the grass to grow deep. That way, if it does hit a time period when we aren't irrigating and we're getting some dry spell, they've got roots deep enough to try and find some water that's not up at the surface. So if you water like daily, you'll end up with very short roots on your grass, and even a really good hot day could actually kill off the grass if you aren't careful. Another thing you'll see a lot of times, somebody that comes in that hasn't done a whole lot of irrigation before will look at this and go, oh, this has a 10-foot radius circle, so I'll put my emitters every 10 feet, so it's 10 feet, it covers the middle. Well, you'll end up with what you get on the lower right, where you get these spots in the middle that nothing gets watered. And I've actually walked across fields before that, you'll walk across a soccer field and go, oh, nice little yellow star in the middle of this field. Everything else is green, and you get this wonderful star pattern, and that's what it's from, is the sprinkler system's not covering. So you're going to want to try and get those sprinkler heads covering from head to head. So instead of a 10-foot diameter circle, you want to try and put them about every 5 feet so that they can hit each other. So it takes a lot more heads, but it is what it needs to be, really. You can also do it by hand. Hand watering works very well for a lawn. The problem is, usually, when you do this, best way to do this is with a end like this or some sort of a spray nozzle on it, where it's just a shower coming out, and you can just kind of slowly work your way across the lawn putting in the water. Problem is, you don't really know exactly how much water you put on. And the other problem is you'll be doing this and the phone will go off saying you need to go check on this, you've got dinner that you have to go do, your kid just went and skinned his knee and now you got to go deal with that. And so you drop the hose down to let it keep watering, and then you walk off, and an hour later go, oh, the water, and you come out and there's a river going down the road because it's just overflowing. So works well if you can remember to shut it off if you're going to leave it. So you can do drip in lawns. It works well. The one big problem with this, and the efficiency on this is nearly 100%, because all of the water goes exactly where the plants need it. So it's very nice. The one thing you run into with this, though, these hoses can only run so much water through them before they, it's just, you can't put any more water through them without a reasonable amount of pressure. And so you can only run, I think, 300 emitters. And so if you look at this yard here, guess probably maybe 60 feet from end to end. So you could only run 5 of those lines on each zone at a time. And so you'd have to cut that up. It looks like this is all as one zone. And I think if I remember counting it, it's something like 18 different lines. And so they're not going to have enough water pressure to run all of those. So when you're watering, we need to remember early in the morning. It's cooler in the morning, so we get less evaporation. Also, the wind patterns, usually the lowest wind velocity is usually right before dawn. And so that's usually when we're trying to try and water. Now, if you're hand watering or manual watering, that's kind of a bit of an issue. And so we probably, a lot of times those people are going to be doing it after work, and so it's going to be an evening watering, which works well. The only problem you need to think about, you want to try and get it after the heat of the night, the real hard heat of the day, and then you want to get it in early enough so that that water will actually have a chance to drip off into the soil and dry off of the leaf blades. St. Augustine is notorious for fungal problems. And so if you water in the middle of the night, especially in the cool part of the night, you have a lot higher chance of getting fungal issues on your grasses. So it's something to think about. I said we want to try and do usually one watering a week, preferably a nice, good, deep soaking water. Unfortunately, with our clay, we may have to break it up into a couple of days. So, watering the trees, pretty much everything that I've just stated goes for the trees too. The one key thing about trees that you have to think about is we need to do the watering at what's called the drip line. Think of the tree as a big umbrella, and where all the leaves drop all of the water that's coming off of it into this one fine line right around the tree. That's where we actually want to water. Those water bags that you hang on your tree trunk, once your tree's gotten more than, about that big around for a canopy on it, you want to pull those bags off. Those are useless at that point. You want to start watering it out where that drip line is going to be. The other nice thing about this is if you do drip, you can run a couple of lines of drip right around the drip line, and it puts all the water right where it needs. So, flower beds. Key thing on the flower beds is to think of what plants you have in there. If you're dealing with something like a rose bush or something that requires a lot more water than normal, we're going to have to take that into account. If we're dealing with something like a lantana, I can do, a 3/4 of an inch worth of watering a week at most, and those lantana will love it. It just depends on the variety. If you water something like Blackfoot daisy, which is a native adaptive prairie flower around here, you will kill it because you'll overwater it. Trust me, I know from experience. Same thing goes with everything else. Once a week watering, mornings, evenings, time frame, that sort of stuff. If you do have any sort of water feature, fountains, ponds, anything like that, you can either do those with an automatic float or by hand. I recommend hand because it's notorious that when a float fails, it always fails in the on position. And so you may not, be out there looking at it and notice that, your bill is $400 because you've got 3,000 gallons worth of water flowing through your pond. So the other thing you can think about is, it is a water source. Any water source will evaporate faster if it's in the sun or if it's in the wind. So if you can block the southwest wind from it, it would probably be a good thing. This could either be by fence, plants, anything like that can help, prevent that water from blowing across that pond to reduce the amount of water that you're actually losing to evaporation. Or, you plant it under a tree a little bit so that it's not as much of a problem. Except with the tree, you get all the tree litter into the pond. So.
How fast does the water evaporate?
I don't have a pond like this, so I couldn't tell you for sure. I do have, it's a pond, but what we call them tanks down here in Texas. Just a big spot in the ground that's, a nice, good muddy pit that water fills in. I've seen it drain in the middle of summer. It'll lose a foot of water in, probably 3 weeks. And that's over about a 15-foot diameter circle. So it's a fair amount of water fairly quickly, especially if it's out in the open field. So, and I'm out in the country, so I don't have a whole lot of city windbreaks in the way. So, watering your veggies. Key thing with veggies: hand watering, drip irrigation. Do not use a sprinkler system in your vegetable beds. A lot of the vegetables do not like to get wet, tomatoes especially. And so you want to try and make sure that all the watering is done strictly at ground level and with as little splash as possible. Did you get the mosquito?
No, I missed it.
Darn. So that's the other problem that we've had with the 9 inches of rainfall this past month. Mosquitoes are horrid right now. So drip irrigation, this is where it really shines on veggies, is because you let it run and it drops just the amount of water you need right there. I said we're looking for probably about 1 inch of rainfall a week on the veggies. It doesn't matter what the type of veggie is. It seems like that actually seems to be the amount that they need. The problem we run into is not the clay soil that we normally have, where it's trying not to absorb all that water, but we're usually in a vegetable bed. We've worked on that soil, make it a very good, well-draining soil, and the problem is it's well-draining. So we water it and it drains through. And so a lot of times what we end up having to do is not water it once a week, but maybe 2 or 3 times a week, a little bit at a time, to make sure that soil stays moist throughout. So, but we are trying to get that soil moisture profile nice and deep into the soil anyhow, to make sure that it does help promote root growth down. So, going to move on to drip irrigation now. Any questions on general irrigation principles? Nothing? All right. Okay. This is one of my flower beds that I've got. It boils down to about 2,000 square feet of flower bed space, which is a fair amount of garden space. Remember, we were looking at maybe an entire yard is 5,000 square feet. So think of this as somebody's front yard. This is what I've got for a flower bed. And so, got a nice patio area, and all of the plants that I have in here, for the most part, are native or adaptive. They're designed for our environment so that they don't have to have a whole lot of water. Okay, this is one of the key things that I worked with. You kind of see now, I've drew in over top of this. I went through and put in what I wanted to do for my drip irrigation system. I've got some better things. Now, I'm an engineer by trade. I have all the tools and toys to play with things like this to make all these pretty pictures. You don't have to be pretty, okay? This is what that looks like if you take away the background picture, and it shows all the different stuff that we do. We've got the hose bib coming out from the house. This is how all the water is getting into this this flower garden. I have a 4-way splitter that immediately attaches to that, and that's very similar to this one. This one's just the 2-way, but you can get them that are 4, and each one has its own little on-off valve, so you can kind of shut them off as needed. And they just hook up straight to your hose. They're wonderful little things to get. They're fairly inexpensive too. But from there, I connect into it for each of my runs that I want to run for the various areas of that garden. But like I said, doesn't have to be pretty. It can be hand drawn if you want. So, but when we're doing it, what we're looking at doing, as we've got it, we've got the ones for my roses down here on the right, the little funky circle looking things. Because the roses are a higher water requirement, I have them on their own separate line. That way I can water them more often and for a longer period of time to make sure that they get enough water to be absolutely gorgeous throughout the year. The rest of the system is basically on one drip line to cover everything else. Like I said, we can run about 300 drip emitters on a line at a time, and which pulls out to be about 5 gallons of water per minute. So it's not a whole lot, but it's still a fair amount of water. But if you notice, I don't have a whole lot of plants in here that need a whole lot of water. Greg's Blue Mist, butterfly crack as we call it, blooms pretty much from early June till the freeze. Yours blooming now. Mine's not quite to that stage yet. So it's May to freeze, and mine actually bloomed for a couple of weeks after the first freeze this past year. So but it's coated in butterflies all year round. Butterflies love it. But I don't have to water it very much. I've got daylilies, and a lot of the bulbing plants, irises, daffodils, those sorts of things. Those don't require a whole lot of water either. Lantana, this line of lantana that I've got down along my driveway. I've got one water line that runs this whole length of the lantana. It's a 32-foot long row of lantana. I've got one row of drip emitters. It takes 30 gallons a week to water those. And I'm like, and they're gorgeous. I mean, these things are, well, they're supposed to be this big around. They're usually closer to 7 or 8 feet across by the end of the summer. And, they're about 5 feet tall. Loaded in blooms all from early June, late May, early June, all the way till I think my last one stopped blooming right around Christmas. And so, I mean, they're beautiful. The bees love it. You walk by this thing in the middle of summer, and the whole row is just buzzing with all the bees on it. So it looks gorgeous, and it takes almost no water. So, but this is how we work with this to try and make sure that we've got our landscape designs. We don't need a whole lot of irrigation, but when we do, we kind of set it up so that it works well. Now, when we're looking at the actual particulars on it, buy this stuff at the irrigation supply stores. Do not buy the garbage at the big box stores. Okay? The tolerances that they build into the ones at the box stores are a lot sloppier, and you end up with a lot more issues with fittings popping off and that. So the tubing itself is a thinner wall. I mean, everything about it says cheap. So this is a little more expensive, but it is well worth it in the long run. Some of these fittings that you see here, I had when I was living in Midland. Some of these fittings, including, I stole some of the stuff when we moved here. I pulled a lot of the stuff up because I needed some immediately over here. And so I pulled it out and ran it here. The emitters on this stuff in Midland was running without any filters on a well system that had about 300 parts per million of total dissolved solids, which, to give you an idea, that means you replace a fitting in your house, work it for about 2 days, and it's got the calcium buildup on it. That's how horribly calcified our water was in Midland. I've yet to have one of these emitters fail, even with that much abuse on it, over 10 years. So they're absolutely amazing, the quality of these things. So it's a buy once and never have to worry about it again until you run over it with a lawnmower. Which will look like, where's the one? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it looks like that. So, now, if you've got an irrigation system already in your house, okay, with the little pop-up sprinkler heads, you can actually swap that system over to drip irrigation, okay? These fittings, you'll usually have, your line going underground, a riser coming up, and then your pop-up sprinkler on that, okay? And you'll have each of your zones like that. You can unscrew these and cap off all but one of them and convert the other one to a drip hose. And that whole zone will, you can do this usually in the flower beds. If you can't mix a pop-up sprinkler head and a drip. So you have to take a zone and turn it completely into drip if you're going to do this. But you can run it into a drip, and now you can set it up with your irrigation system. Nice and easy. Works real well. Key thing about it, though, and I've run into this by a couple of people, a lot of times you're going to have this coming up. What you may have to do is cut this down a little bit and put a pressure reducer on it. The emitters can only handle about 30 psi. That's what they're rated for. 20 is usually better, I've found. I've run them as low as 10 without any problems. You might get a little bit less water flow out of it at 10, but it still works. If you have too much pressure, you can ask Don back there what happens. The fittings will start popping off, especially in the heat of the summer. The plastics get a little soft and they'll slip out a little bit easier, but it takes a fair amount of pressure to do it. When we're talking pressure, if you aren't sure what your pressure is, you can cheat and make a little pressure gauge for it so you can hook up right to your hose system and find out what you've got. This one I've got set up on a quick disconnect, so I can screw this onto a hose, take it over to somebody's house, screw it onto their hose and go, okay, turn on the water, that's how much pressure you've got. And so you can check to make sure that you are actually getting a decent amount of pressure and not too much. So, fittings, there are all sorts of fittings. The key ones you really need a lot of times are the T fittings. These work very well for doing loops, doing side shoots. Like on my roses, I've got a row of what we call blank, which would be this stuff. Does not have any emitters in it. And so it runs down, I'll hook it into a T. T will go over, and then I'll run a loop of emitters around the rose bush. Okay? And so to do that, I would take something like this. Where is spare T? On my part. Where it is. Of course, it's the one on the bottom. So, now, remember the old math equation, 2 pi r for your circumference of a circle? That's what we're looking at. A 6 foot diameter or 6 foot length of hose gives you about a 2 foot diameter circle. Okay, so works well for that, just to kind of remember. But all you have to do to hook it on is just squeeze. A little bit of rock helps. You don't want to do too much, otherwise you'll kink it. And if you kink it, it continues to kink at that one point, and it's harder to put on. But you can do it that way, and then your other side of the emitters over here, and have that around your plant. Okay, and then this will run off to wherever it needs to. Yes?
Why did you choose to go with the circle rather than running a straight line on either side of the roses?
I could go either way, but at the time I knew, roses can get expensive. I knew I wasn't going to be putting them in right away. And so I've got the one blank line that runs the water to the one rose that I do have right now. And as I fill in, I will just be able to drop a new one in each time. That way I don't have to worry about watering stuff. The other nice thing about drip hoses, you only water what you want. Of that 2,000 square foot flower bed, maybe 1,000 square foot of that is actually under bush at any time, from various flowers. And so the rest of it is just heavily mulched with 4 inches of wood chip mulch. And that means I don't have to weed anything because it's not getting watered. So that's one of the key things about that. The other ones you'll use a lot will be, where'd it go? Okay. That one on the lower left is a straight fitting. This is half of it here, the other half's in here. Turns out squirrels like trying to chew into these to get the water. So if you do put in a drip system, I recommend that you leave a small saucer of water kind of hidden in the back so that the squirrels and whatnot can have the water there and out of the way, and so they'll go to that instead of tearing up all of your drip system. But if you hit this either with a shovel, the lawnmower, squirrels getting into it, all you have to do is just cut it. And to give you an idea how easy this stuff is to cut, this is just a simple carpet knife. This is what I use, and it just pops right through. Okay, these work really well, which you can come up and take a look at here later. But it's easy to cut, so you can just kind of cut, keep the holes clean, put that fitting in there, and it is a repair job for it right in that one spot.
Is there a name for that tubing specifically, or just drip irrigation line?
It's drip irrigation line. I believe the company that originally made it was called Netafim, and there is an Israeli company that made the original stuff, and it's wonderful. But they're used to dealing with a lot of salt water. So the lower right picture is one of these types of fittings. It's for putting into a screws into your pressure reducer. Okay. Now the one thing you have to remember, most of the fittings that you deal with that are PVC are what's called national pipe thread. It is not hose thread. They sort of fit together. In fact, I can take this and kind of screw it on, and it'll kind of fit, but not quite, and it will leak very badly. You have to get a fitting to go between the two. So that's the only big problem with those. Where is... I know I've got one here. Okay. This one right here, this black part down, that actually is designed to work straight onto a hose. It's got the right fittings, and it's got an O-ring to make sure that it seals off nicely. Some of the other different types of parts, the one in the upper left is that hose fitting one, the O-rings that you have to use for those. The pressure reducers, there's a couple of different types. You've got this type, and then some of the newer ones, where did it go, will look more like this as a fitting. So either way works. Just make sure that when you do put it in, these are one way only, to make sure you're going with the correct direction on your flow. And it'll let you know how many gallons per minute this thing can flow through it. Most of them are rated to no more than 5 gallons per minute, which is where you come up with the 300 emitters as a maximum length. The little T, or the valve at the end is very helpful on a lot of times, because when you use things, if you want to shut a particular line off, you can do it. This is what some of the fittings look like. I've got those up here. You can kind of come up and look at them after the talk's done. And so, as you notice, it's got a little bit of a filter in it so that any big chunks are actually knocked out. And then what it does is this little white piece right here actually vibrates as the water flows through it to help keep any calcium buildup from happening on that, and shatters it off. And notice on the one on the lower right, all of it, it's open tube, and just the emitter is only on half of it, so it's always open to flow water. So if an emitter does for some reason get clogged, it's not going to clog up the next emitter down the line. This is what that diagram that I had, that's what it actually looks like, or at least it did until I actually put it into a full system. As you can see, I've got the first one comes, the for the four-way shut off, adapter to go into my pressure reducer, and then I've got a fitting to go into 2 separate lines, because like I said, you can get fittings that do just about everything. So the 2 lines come out. One of them, the reason I did it this way is because I was running out of connections on here. I originally had 4 that I was planning to run, but I found out through other things I needed to have 2 separate hoses on there. So I didn't want to put in a 4-way with a couple of hoses here and then another 4-way on top of that to add a couple extra connections. So I was like, I'll just do this and tee off of them. But that's where I use some of those small little black valves to shut off individual lines. So the one on the upper side goes up and around, and it covers a couple of pots that I have that I can water separately, and then the other one is the main line. Now, the second one, as you notice, there isn't a pressure reducer on that one. That goes out to my orchard. It's about 150 feet out, and so it turns out that I looked at it, I'm like, I don't want to reduce the pressure until it gets out to the line, out to the orchard, so I have the right pressure there. I don't care about pressure here, I worry about pressure out there to make sure it's not too high. Well, it turns out it loses enough pressure between this valve and the pressure reducer. The pressure reducer is effectively useless because it's down to under 30 psi all the time. And so I never have to actually use the pressure. The pressure reducer's there, but it doesn't need it. That's the only reason, though, that these fittings haven't popped off, is because it's never at over 30 psi.
Sorry.
No problem.
Do you just run one of these at a time? Because that would impact the pressure as well.
Yeah. Because these are all running off of these, and these are very small openings, I usually run one run at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I can use the hoses temporarily, but it's only for a minute or a couple of minutes, that sort of thing, so it's not a big deal. These are usually, because of the amount of water that they drip, you usually run them for an hour at a time. An hour will give you 1 gallon in each emitter, and that will give you a 1-foot diameter circle of water for 1 inch of water, effectively. So it turns out it's very, very easy. You do one hour, 1 inch of water out of that emitter.
So you're saying 1 gallon out of each little hole?
Yep.
At which, at the 15 psi?
Yeah. And like I said, this one's just at a 15. It's anywhere between 10 and 30 will work. And they're self-regulating also, at least a little bit, in the emitters. Okay, so that's what that plan looked like. That's what one of my roses looks like. And so, like I said, it's just got the one little loop right around it, so it's nice and easy to handle. As Dawn was saying over there, you can run it with the 2 lines, one on either side of the plant, especially if it needs a little bit more. Where that plant is used to be an Esperanza, which needed a little bit more water. It died during Snowmageddon, and in its place popped up a Flamacanthus, which does not need any water. But it's surviving and doing beautifully in that spot. So I'm like, whatever, you're good, and I'm not going to complain. For pots are a little bit different. The interesting thing about pots, usually what you use when you use pots is this type of line, which is the 1/4 inch tubing, and with an emitter in it like these. These emitters are not nearly as good as these emitters. Okay, these will die even in our reasonably clean water about every 3 years at most. So you'll have to replace them out. Now, the nice thing about this, I can run a line all the way down with the good tubing and run a whole bunch of emitters for, say, like my lantana, which is just to the off screen to the right, and punch into that with a 1/4 inch tubing. There is a tool right here that works, and all you have to do for this, it's just got a nice big sharp spike on it. Pop it in, nice little hole, and then you take your adapter and it seals tight.
Are you putting that into your emitter end or your solid?
This is a adapter for, like like this one, the repair part. It's the same thing for this. So it's got just basically a male fitting on either end. It's not a emitter.
So could you pop that into one of the emitters rather than?
No, the emitters, you're thinking into one of the emitters here? No, it won't work. So the emitters are a much harder plastic. So, but now I can go run those up into any pots that I may have. Works well if I run this down, say, to the base of my porch, and then run a 1/4 inch line, which they come in various colors. So you may actually be able to match the trim on your house. Run it up, and then you can run a whole series of these into each of your hanging baskets, maybe. And so run them off of your drip irrigation system with that. Understand these put out the same, you can get them down to about a 1/2 gallon per hour. But remember that you're going to running these systems an hour if you hook it up to the same system. And so your pots may get a lot more water than they need right off. So you may have to break it into a separate line. So also pots usually need to be watered a little more often. So
would I have to water that for an hour also, or can I do it for?
you can do it for less time, but like I said, if you're doing a system where you're running like my lantana and the drip at the same time, I'm just going to run it for the full hour for the lantana, and the pots just get really well watered, which means I also have to fertilize a little bit more for the pots because I'm going to wash out a lot of the fertilizer. So it's something to think about.
Can I just double check my understanding? The emitter I understood as being the little piece that actually sprays the water out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And these, these are really hard to pull out, but I can do it.
And you had an adapter on the other side.
Yes, and I've got various piece parts in here that we can kind of play with later as we want. One of the things I have noticed with this stuff, especially the tees are fairly brittle, and when you're trying to put these in together, I've snapped numerous ones, and it's usually a nice piece of sharp plastic that jabs into my heel of my hand when I do that. So be careful with these. If you can make sure that the 1/4-inch tubing is nice and warm, leaving it out in the summer sun is a good time. Hair dryer briefly, if you want, could warm it up. The other thing that I do use a lot of times, not only with this, but especially if I'm doing a project for Master Gardeners and we're doing a bunch of people, a lot of whom don't have a whole lot of hand strength, what I will do, I'll use this one. All right, I need to hook this onto here. You saw how hard it was for me to put that in. I've got an old jar of Johnson's baby shampoo. Doesn't have to be this. It just some form of a can be as simple as spit, but and everything works. But just a little bit on it to lube it up a little bit. The reason I like the Johnson's baby shampoo, it's pretty much a health safe for us. No tears, and so. It's not a big problem. Also, it's shampoo, which means it's basically a fertilizer, and then it breaks down, but it's a whole lot easier to slide on.
Why didn't you tell me that last year when I was doing mine?
You didn't listen to my talk the other time.
So bad.
Now, when you are doing this, one of the things you can do is when you go to put something like this on, especially with the tees, let me break this one loose here. Oh, and if you need to break a fitting loose, you cannot pull them, plain and simple. I take the end of a knife carefully, because I don't want to cut into the plastic of the actual tee, and just kind of slice it open, break it loose, okay? Clean that up so it's a nice good end. So a lot of times it's going to be hard to do. Let me actually put it on this one just to show. So like this, it's going to be hard. So a lot of times what I will do is I'll put it onto the ground. And this is where you really have to make sure that it doesn't bend as you're pushing it on, because it wants to bend wherever it can. And so you can just kind of put your weight onto it and punch it in. So that works pretty well too.
Pressure for using collected rainwater.
If you're using rainwater, you're going to have a system that actually has a pump on it. And so, but that's the one, rainwater is wonderful, but having to have the pump and everything else gets to be a pain. So.
You can't just let it leak out like we do over at the demo garden.
Not very fast. Now, if you did it with something like a soaker hose, it wouldn't be a problem. You could, because the soaker hose, the big problem with soaker hoses, you notice I never mentioned one in the whole presentation. They clog up very quickly with calcium buildup. And so they aren't dripping out, they start spraying, at which point they're about useless. But if you're doing rainwater, there's no calcium in the rainwater, so you can actually use them for pretty much indefinitely. So, yeah, so there was the tool that I showed you. Talked about those. Vegetable gardens. Most of my vegetable gardens I do in raised beds, but I have done in-ground too. If you're doing it in-ground, it's not a big deal. You can just use it like you normally would, running as 1 foot apart with these, because they'll do that nice big 1 foot circle of water for each of the rows. If you're doing it something like a raised bed where the ground is very well draining and it will drain and go away from where the roots of the system are going to be at, you have to usually end up doubling or tripling up your lines. 6 inches apart is about the minimum that I would do. That's what you see on the left. On the right, I've got about 4-inch spacing. I usually use that for something like onions and garlic beds because they're so tight together. You got to make sure that everything gets wet. And so it's a little bit harder to do. So I kind of bunch those up a lot tighter. Usually what I will do is not only space them together tighter this way, but the emitters are 1 foot apart all the way. And so this one, I'll start here. This line, I won't put this emitter at the same point. I'll move it down a couple of inches, and so that they offset, so that it waters much more of the bed. And I don't have to, I only run these because I'm doing 3 or 4 times as many lines. I'm only running these for 10 or 15 minutes because it'll still soak up that whole bed, and it'll get a full inch worth of water for that whole area. So it's nice.
How long are you running that?
Usually running about 10 or 15 minutes, usually about twice a week. And that's more than enough water for any of the flower beds, or veggie beds.
Wait, so how come the grass you have to do for a full hour?
Because it's in the ground.
Okay.
You're doing it 1 foot apart.
Okay.
And in 1 hour, it will get a 1 foot diameter circle.
Okay.
And the ground, it doesn't really, it's our clay ground, so it's not going anywhere. In my raised bed, if I run these for more than 20 minutes, I can watch the water running out the bottom of the beds.
Okay, got it. It's not as compact.
It's not as compact. It's much better draining soil, but which is what we want for vegetables.
Yeah.
So that is what a rose bush can look like here with zero maintenance. The only thing I ever do to this rose bush is I water it, and maybe once a week. If you're looking for roses, look for earth-kind roses. They are much more durable to pests, diseases. You don't have to deadhead them for the most part, and they will look like this for most of the summer. The first blush is always beautiful like this, but then they'll keep roses, half as many roses for most of the rest of the season without any care whatsoever. For the most part, though, master gardeners, we don't recommend roses because of rose rosette disease, but I have to have roses. So that's my lantana hedge. Like I said, it was originally supposed to be about a 4 foot diameter bush, 3 foot tall. With the amount of water I put on it, that's what it looks like. And that's about 8 feet across. Inside, front to back. Flamacanthus up front. I got Turk's cap in the back. This is where my Blackfoot daisy used to be. Yeah, too much water. But I got some salvias in there and stuff. The hummingbirds, I sit out there in the morning because east is that way on the screen. And so you end up with, I sit in the shade, just sit there and watch the hummingbirds and butterflies throughout my garden. Very beautiful. That's the Greg's Blue Mist there in the lower end of the picture. Beautiful purpley blue flower. Like I said, that whole thing, I'll walk by it and it'll just have a cloud of butterflies come off of it in the middle of summer. So, questions?
Which one did the hummingbirds like? Is it the salvia?
They will do the salvia, they will do the Turk's cap, they will do the Flamacanthus. They like all of them. I've seen them occasionally on the lantana, but I don't think they get enough off of it. They'll try a couple of times and they're like, nah.
So is it just one emitter per plant for the?
Usually, I mean, it's how much it needs to do. If there's okay, so for the Greg's Blue Mist, let's see if I can get it right. Where is it? I've got it. Come on. Where's my diagram? There we go. Okay. This is my Greg's Blue Mist. And so I just run 2 sets of emitters for the whole bed of, that Greg's Blue Mist is probably 6 or 7 foot long now. Started with 3 plants. It's spread, but all it is just one line that goes up and one line that comes back. And it covers that whole section of ground with enough moisture to keep those going well. So it depends on what you're trying to do. If you have a plant like the rose bush, I'll just deal with the rose bush. If we're doing something like my lantana, it only needs a little bit of water. So I have just one line going down beside the lantana. So that it probably gets maybe 2 emitters per plant. And that they're a foot off of the base of the plant. They just kind of keep the ground moist right in that area where the root zone is. So it kind of depends on what that plant is. So it's very, very hit or miss. I have no problems with running just a line out and then a single emitter for a plant if that's what it needs. So, like I said, each emitter will give you a circle of wet about like that. And so, when I do the circles like around the rose bush, what that does is give me a strip, a 1 foot wide strip around the rose bush for the roots to go into and get all the water they need. So.
Can that be used around trees?
Yes, you could run. I would recommend probably 2 lines. Right at the drip line, just run a big circle right around the drip line. I would do 2 loops just to get enough water to cover a couple of foot strip, and that's where all of the roots that the tree really takes up all of its nutrients and water is right there at the drip line. And so if you can keep that area nice and moist for them, that works great. The nice thing is, as that tree expands in size, all you have to do is, cut the line, add a couple of extra feet in there, and, move it out as needed.
Now you're putting emitters in that circle, right?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I just happen to have blank.
Right.
I didn't have, the one section of emitter stuff that I have was big, and I didn't feel like carrying a whole loop of it in, so.
Doesn't matter if you put the emitters, do they have to go?
Doesn't matter if they go down, up, sideways, doesn't matter.
Oh.
Yeah, they just kind of come out and just dribble off, whichever way. Now, one thing I will say, if you are doing it underground, like if you're doing the sod layout like that, I'd recommend probably putting them down to try and help flush them out if there's any dirt that wants to try and get in there. Yes, ma'am.
So, I did the thing you said not to buy. It was a box store. So, when you're talking emitters, so the big box store came with this whole little package of different things. Some are like a sprinkler, some are like just the drip.
Yep, and most of it runs kind of off of the 1/4 inch probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is the emitter that's best? Because you said most don't like to be wet, like our vegetables, our tomatoes.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that incorrectly because it has a little,
Yeah.
just the drip part.
Yeah, I would do drips, especially around your, and the nice thing about this type of stuff, if you're going to do one of those type of things, you can sit there and go, one for this plant, one for that plant, and then run down to the next one and do emitter there. And that way you're only working on the plants. So the one thing that you'll find, though, if you're doing that, is when you do this, there's no way to shut these off. Okay, so there are, as far as I know, I haven't found a valve, but I haven't looked recently. So if you've got one that you need to shut off because it's not, you don't have anything growing there, yeah, it's just going to be watering that spot of ground regardless.
Is that what you put on that loop for your rose bushes, is kind
No,
of like this?
these, no, I use that, and what it is this type, like I said, this is the blank, this is what the emitter, the normal emitter hose is. And what it is right here, there's a little hole, that's the emitter, okay? And,
So nothing goes in that?
no, nothing goes in.
Oh, oh.
That, no,
So that's
that is the emitter,
I
right
thought
there.
you said little piece was the emitter. That's
Well, it's,
Okay. So that's like a
Okay.
sulfur hose, sort of.
okay, so that's what the inside of the hose looks like. All
Just
right.
the inside of the hose?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's, all
Okay.
right, so I cut off where the emitter is, and that's what the underside of the emitter looks like. And so that is the actual emitter itself, right there, that comes out of that hole.
So for some of them, you have to put in an extra piece to be.
Yeah, for this stuff, you actually have to have this emitter. Yeah,
Those hoses,
these, you don't. Yeah,
that's why I was asking you about that one.
Yeah.
Circle.
yeah, no, what I'll use is this emitter hose, like this, and it'll actually have the holes
Okay, so
all the way around.
Emitter hoses, and that's in called blanks.
Yeah, so y'all can come out and take a look, because I know you guys can't see from here, you know, what these look like, but, so you can come up and take a look, hands-on, play around with all the piece parts that you have. Just be very careful with the knives, they are sharp, so.
Do you have to cover them up with mulch or dirt or anything, or will the sun get it?
You do not have to. They will last a little bit longer in the if they're covered. That said, yeah, this one, as you can see, nice and white, not so white. That's 5 years in the Midland sun, and that's all it did. And they're still nice and solid. Okay, so they don't have any problems with that. So they'll last out in the sun years without any major problems.
Do you have to do anything to the system over winter?
I try not to run it during the winter, and usually it'll drain itself out as long as it's disconnected so that it's got air can get into it to flow out. Because of the way the system was set up on these, I just go ahead and disconnect it from here and just let them sit for the winter. The one thing, if you do have a part, specifically these, the pressure regulators hold water, so if there's any way you can get these to actually get them up and drain them out a little bit, you know, that is a good thing, because I lose these only to ice. That's the only reason I've lost one of these, and I've probably lost half a dozen. So, but I've got like my vegetable bed, I grow throughout the winter, and so I have to have that set up there, and so if I don't disconnect that line and let it drain, this thing stays full of water and it shatters. So, and it's like, eh.
Have you ever used the timers for your extenders?
You mean like these?
Yeah. One that has the four outlets
Yeah.
on it, so that you can do 4 different zones.
Yeah. Okay, so like a normal irrigation system box to controller? No?
No, like that, but it has 4.
Huh, okay, I had not seen one like that.
It's like your
Yeah.
hose setup.
Yeah.
It has the 4 outlets, only.
It's one of these, except it's got 4.
Yep.
Huh, that'd be cool. Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't work really well.
Do all different zones, and
Yeah.
you don't have to manually go out and
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, and one key thing I've found, if you're going to do it manually like I do, or used to, set the timer on your phone, then turn on the water. And then when the alarm goes off, hit repeat,
Right?
unless you are literally walking out that instant to go turn it off. Because you will forget, you'll go, oh, yeah, I need to go do that, and then something will catch you. And for me, my big problem is my veggie garden. You saw how many emitters I had in there. Each of those beds is about 50 emitters. Okay, so that's 50 gallons an hour that I'm dumping on those beds. And I've got probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, probably 10 beds, so 500 gallons an hour. I'll forget, because I have it set up so that it waters at the same time I water my chickens and pigs in the evening. And so I'll turn on the water, handle those, get everybody into bed, and then shut it off. If I forget to shut it off, it runs all night. And so I'll walk out in the morning to the sound of dripping water coming out of my raised beds. And it's about $75 each time I do that. So I've learned very quickly, alarm first, then water.
So you're on city water?
Effectively, yeah. I'm Potosi Water, and so they buy their water from City of Abilene.
Gee, I heard Potosi had no pressure.
Off and on.
Okay.
Is it bad?
I haven't had much problem where I'm at. I'm kind of downhill, so I get a little bit of extra pressure coming from that. We're down past the community center, if you know where that is out there. With all the buildup that they've had, it wouldn't surprise me that they've been having issues. So, but I usually don't have any issues with pressure. In fact, the one time I did have pressure problems, it was the opposite. My pressure regulator at the water meter blew. And so I was getting about 95 PSI at the house. Well, yeah, it was not good. So I had them come fix that quick before I started blowing fittings out in the house. So, other questions?
You recommended getting it straight from a irrigation supply store.
Yes.
Where do you get yours?
As a master gardener, I'm not allowed to tell you any particular store, but there are only 2 in town that I know of. I prefer the south one more than the north one. They're both the same, effectively. That one's a little closer to me, but they both have pretty much the same general selection of parts. So,
And the one on the south side, they'll help you out quite a bit.
yeah. The north side's friendly too. I've had some good luck with them too. So,
Well, the south side gave you stuff free too, so.
well. Okay. So, any more questions? All right. Come on up. Take a look at everything. We can have some more questions. Not a problem.